My wife told me to apologize to her brother in front of everyone, or leave the house. I stood up, walked over to him, and said one sentence. 20 minutes later, 3 marriages were over, including mine. I'm telling this now because it's been a year, and for the first time in a decade, I can breathe without feeling like someone's boot is on my neck. My name is Alaric, and for 12 years, I was the family punching bag. I'm a senior systems architect, a job that requires a high level of technical precision and pays a salary most people would dream of. But to my ex-wife's family, I was just the glorified IT guy who wasn't man enough to handle real business. I spent years staying quiet to keep the peace. I swallowed insults like they were vitamins. But that night at the dinner table, the peace didn't just break, it detonated. You see, my brother-in-law, Lachlan, always thought he was the smartest person in the room because he wore expensive suits and talked about international logistics like he was a movie villain. My ex-wife, Saffron, spent every day of our marriage telling me I was overreacting when her family mocked my career, my hobbies, or even the way I spoke. She'd say, "That's just how they are, Alaric. Don't be so sensitive." But how they are was a calculated effort to make me feel small. It took me a long time to realize that they weren't just mean. They were hiding something. And as an engineer, I'm very good at finding the one glitch that brings down the entire system. The tension had been building for years, a slow-burning fire that I ignored because I thought being a good husband meant being a silent one. I remember a specific Christmas at Saffron's parents' estate, a massive place they called the Anchorage. It was cold outside, but the atmosphere inside was freezing for a different reason. I had just received a significant promotion at my firm, moving into a lead role that involved overseeing the security of massive data centers. I was proud. When I mentioned it during the appetizers, Lachlan didn't even look up from his phone. He just let out a dry, short laugh. He told the table that it was cute that I was excited about being a digital janitor. He said that while I was worrying about servers, he was moving actual assets across borders. Saffron laughed along with him, telling me later that I shouldn't be so boastful because it made Lachlan feel like he had to compete. It wasn't just the words. It was the way they viewed the world. To them, if you didn't have your name on a building or a fleet of trucks, you didn't exist. Lachlan's wife, Thora, was just as bad, though her cruelty was quieter. She would ask me questions about my little computer projects with a look of pity, as if I were a child playing with blocks. Saffron's parents, Cormac and Vesper, treated me like a service provider who happened to be sleeping in their guest room. They would ask me to fix their tablets or reset their routers in the middle of dinner, never saying thank you, just treating it as my contribution to the family since I didn't bring real prestige. I started to notice the cracks in Lachlan's facade about 18 months ago. He started asking me weirdly specific questions about how digital footprints could be erased or how private servers in certain jurisdictions worked. He framed it as market research, but his eyes were too hungry. As a systems architect, I don't just build things. I protect them. I know what a person looks like when they're trying to find a back door. I began to look at the family's joint investment portfolio, something Saffron had insisted I stay out of because finance isn't your strength. I realized that the numbers didn't add up. The growth was too consistent, too perfect, and yet the underlying assets Lachlan claimed to manage were nowhere to be found in public filings. The months leading up to the final dinner were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Saffron began to pull away, spending more time at her brother's office, helping him with what she called high-level administration. Whenever I tried to talk to her about our own finances, she would shut me down, saying Lachlan was handling everything and that I should focus on my cables and screens. She started comparing our lifestyle to Lachlan's. She wanted a bigger house, a more impressive car, and she constantly reminded me that if I had taken the risks Lachlan took, we wouldn't be living so modestly. I was making $200,000 a year, but to her, I was a failure because I wasn't a millionaire. I spent my nights in my home office, not playing games, but digging. I used my skills to map out the web of shell companies Lachlan had created. It was a sophisticated mess, designed to confuse anyone without a background in data forensics. He was siphoning money from Thora's family trust and moving it through a series of logistics firms that had no employees and no trucks. Smiling face with smiling eyes, he was using Saffron's inheritance as collateral for high-risk loans to cover his personal gambling debts and a failed real estate venture in the Mediterranean. He wasn't a shark, he was a parasite. And the worst part was that Saffron was signing the documents he put in front of her without reading a single word, purely because she trusted his status more than my intelligence. I remember a weekend trip to a mountain cabin where the belittling reached a fever pitch. Lachlan had spent the entire evening bragging about a new logistics hub he was opening in the Caribbean. He turned to me and said, "Alaric, you're a smart guy in your own way. Why don't you quit that dead-end job and come work for me? I could use a guy to manage the printers and the email accounts. I'll even pay you a little extra so Saffron can finally buy that bag she wants." The table erupted in laughter. Saffron leaned over and whispered, "Maybe you should consider it. At least you'd be part of something real for once." That was the night I stopped trying to save her and started documenting everything for my own exit strategy. The night of the final dinner arrived like a slow-motion car crash. It was Vesper's birthday, and the entire clan had gathered. The air was thick with the smell of expensive roast beef and the sound of Lachlan's booming voice. He was talking about the future of global trade, acting like he was the king of the world. He'd recently convinced Cormac to move a significant portion of his retirement fund into one of his new ventures. I sat there, nursing a glass of water, knowing that the venture was actually a sinking ship and the money was already gone. Lachlan looked across the table at me, his face flushed from wine. "So, Alaric, I heard your firm is doing some layoffs. Worried about your little cubicle?" I looked him dead in the eye. "My firm is fine, Lachlan. We actually produce a product. We don't just move numbers around to hide the fact that we're broke." The table went silent. Saffron's hand froze on her wine glass. Cormac looked up, his brow furrowing. "What did you just say?" "You heard me?" I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "Lachlan's logistics are a fantasy. He hasn't moved a crate in 3 years. He's just moving your money into his own pockets to pay off the people he owes in Vegas." Lachlan slammed his hand on the table, the silverware rattling. "You little prick. You have no idea what you're talking about. Saffron, control your husband." Saffron stood up, her face twisted in a mask of pure fury. "Alaric, shut up. You are jealous, you are small, and you are embarrassing this family. Stand up and apologize to Lachlan right now, or you can leave this house and never come back. I mean it. Apologize or we are done." I didn't hesitate. I didn't feel fear. I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. I stood up, walked around the long mahogany table, and stopped right behind Lachlan. I didn't look at Saffron. I looked at Cormac and Thora. "I hope the authorities in the Cayman Islands are as impressed with his ambition as you are, because I found the offshore account he's been using to siphon your trust funds and your retirement." The reaction wasn't immediate. It was a wave that built and then crashed. Lachlan tried to stand up, but his knees seemed to give out, and he slumped back into his chair. His face turned a shade of gray I've only seen in old movies. Thora was the first to speak. "What offshore account?" I pulled a folded packet of papers from my inner jacket pocket and set it on the table. "Everything is there. The account numbers, the transfer logs from Thora's trust, and the signatures, some of which are forged, some of which Saffron signed because she didn't bother to look. He's been using a shell company called L-Stream Logistics to funnel money into an account in Grand Cayman. There's less than 5% of the original capital left. The rest went to creditors and personal expenses you guys didn't know about." Thora grabbed the papers, her eyes scanning the lines of data. She was a CPA by trade, though she hadn't worked in years. Within seconds, her face mirrored Lachlan's. She looked at her husband, her voice a low, terrifying hiss. "Lachlan, why is my father's name on a transfer to a gambling site in Malta? It's a mistake." Lachlan shouted, but his voice lacked any conviction. He looked at Saffron. "Sis, tell them he's crazy. He's a tech guy. He probably hacked something to make it look bad." Saffron looked at the papers, then at me, then at the brother she had idolized. The reality started to sink in. She realized that her status was built on a foundation of theft, and that she was potentially legally liable for the documents she had signed. She turned back to me, her eyes filling with tears. "Alaric, why didn't you tell me privately?" "I tried," I said. "For 3 years, I tried to talk to you about our future and our money. You told me to stay in my lane. You told me I wasn't man enough to understand. Well, I understand perfectly now. And since you gave me that choice, I'm choosing to leave." I walked out of the room as the first plates started to fly. I heard Thora screaming that she was taking the kids and calling her lawyer. I heard Cormac's voice booming in a way I'd never heard before, demanding to know where his retirement had gone. The elite family was tearing itself apart in the wreckage of its own arrogance. The aftermath was a legal and emotional hurricane. Thora divorced Lachlan within 4 months, taking him for everything he had left, which wasn't much, and providing the state's attorney with all the evidence they needed for a fraud case. Cormac and Vesper had to sell the anchorage to cover their debts, moving into a small condo and cutting off all contact with Lachlan. Their marriage, built on the pride of their successful children, couldn't survive the shame. Saffron lost everything. Because she had signed so many of the documents, she was caught in a web of litigation for nearly a year. She lost the house, the car, and the lifestyle she'd mocked me for not providing. When our divorce was finalized, she tried one last time to get me to forgive her, claiming she was a victim too. But I knew better. She wasn't a victim of Lachlan. She was a victim of her own greed and her desire to look down on the man who actually loved her. My life, however, changed for the better in ways I couldn't have imagined. I moved to a city where people value intelligence over bravado. I started a private security firm that specializes in protecting high-net-worth individuals from the exact kind of internal fraud Lachlan practiced. I met Eloan at a tech conference. She's a research scientist, brilliant and kind, and she never once has asked me to fix her Wi-Fi as a joke. We live in a modest but beautiful home, and the only status we care about is the respect we have for each other. Lachlan is currently serving a 7-year sentence in a federal facility. He doesn't wear suits anymore. He wears a jumpsuit. The last time I saw Saffron, she was working a retail job at the mall, looking like a ghost of the woman she used to be. I didn't feel joy, but I didn't feel pity either. I just felt nothing. I had finally found the one thing money can't buy: a life where I don't have to apologize for who I am. If this story meant something to you, consider subscribing. It helps us share more stories like this. Subscribe to the channel to see more stories of truth and justice.